All right, so let's get up and running with our first component. Our first component, we're going to build something that looks a little bit something like this, where it's called our store picker component, where we're going to allow people to enter in the name of the store. And when they click that URL, it's going to move them to /store/ the name of the store that we actually have. So open up your index.js. We're going to write it here and then refactor it out to its own component file. But I wanted to talk real quick about how this actually gets loaded onto the page. Earlier, we just had written, hey, and when we saved it, it automatically refreshed. But how is that actually happening? Well, if you view the source on your actual page, you'll see that there's a script tag here where it says /static/js/ bundle.js. And what is happening is that Webpack, the thing that's running under the hood with Create React App, it's sort of taking in your index.js and it's going to take in all the other files that we require inside of this index.js. And it's going to bundle it all into one big .js file. So if you actually click through to that, you're going to see that there's already some code in there. And don't worry too much about this, just because this is the code that's required to do the hot reloading, the instant updating. So this code doesn't actually come along for the ride when we deploy it to our actual application. This is just for development. But this little hey that I've written in here, if I search for alert hey, there it is. There's the code that we've actually written. And I'm sure if I were to say hello and give us a save and refresh, now my bundle.js will have hello in there. You can see it. So that's great. What we need to do is go into this. You can delete all of the code that's in our index.js. And the very first thing that we need to do is import our dependencies. And the way that we do that is we type import React R from quotes React. And what's going to happen sort of behind the scenes there is it's going to go into our node modules folder, because remember we had that package.json file here and we said that React was one of our dependencies. Well, that means that when we npm installed it, we're able to then import it via this notation that we have here. This is called ES6 modules. So we imported React from React here. And then what we need to do is make a class. So every single component that we have is going to be its own class. And the way that you create a class in React is you say class, and then we can just make up the name for it. So let's call it a store picker. It's sort of a best practice to put a capital on the front of all of your classes. And the reasoning behind that is because they are going to be reusable. If we wanted to render out 2 or 3 store picker components to the same page, we totally could. And that sort of notes to us. Then we'll say extends and react.component. Component is the thing that we are extending inside of there. Now, you may also see sometimes online, instead of people importing all of React, they will simply just import component from React, and then they just simply extend component instead of react.component. What's the difference? Absolutely nothing. It doesn't make your bundle size any smaller in the case of React here. It's just you don't have to type react dot. So that's up to you. Just make sure that you remember that you do it one way. Another thing you need to remember is don't put a capital R on here. That will cause tons of pain in the future in terms of, I've done it myself, all sorts of crazy errors that you don't think you have. Now, we're in this class here, and every single class in React needs at least one method inside of it, and that method is something called render. And render determines what HTML do I put on the page, or what DOM elements at the end of the day do I render out to the page. So the way that we do that is we type render. And this is just the syntax for putting a method inside of a component. And then from render, we simply just return, and let's just give ourselves a paragraph that says hello and give that a save. Now, nothing's going to show up on here, and that's because we haven't yet mounted our application. So this is another important aspect inside of React, is that we're not actually ever going to be touching the DOM. What I mean by that is we're never actually going to be doing any selecting a div and updating the text in the div. But there is one time that we do need to touch the DOM in React, and that is when we mount the entire application to the page. So if you open up the index.js or index.html file that's in your public folder, you'll notice that we have this empty div with an ID of main. And this is sort of where you will be mounting your React application. Now, if this was another application, maybe you're working on like a WordPress theme, or you have another CMS where you don't want the entire app to be built in React, but you want like maybe a store picker or a video player to be built in React. If that's the case, then you would have an empty div on the page, and that's where your React would get mounted to. In our case, the entire application is going to be built in React. So really the only HTML that you need to write is an empty div where we're going to mount it to. So we'll go into here. And in order to actually get it to render out to the page, we need a secondary package called React DOM. And the reason why we have a secondary package called React DOM is because React can be used for a number of other things that we have. So React can be used to build iOS apps, and it can be used for Android apps, and it can be used to render to Canvas. So it's not just rendering out to the DOM, but in our case, we're building a website, so we need to render out to the DOM. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to say import curly brackets render from React DOM. Now, what's the difference between importing just React without the curly brackets, or from this, which is simply just the render method from React DOM? And the answer to that is, in this case, we need the entire React package in order to build our application. But in some cases, you only need one of the methods. You sort of want to just cherry pick that little one method from the package that you need. And in our case, we only need the render method. There's a couple of other methods in there that are used for server-side rendering and rendering out to a string. But in our case, we just want the render method. So we have this now method called render, and we can open and close it. And the render method takes two things. First, it takes some JSX, which is sort of like HTML. So like, let me put a paragraph tag that says hello there. Or let's do something more fun. Hey. And the second thing that render needs is the mounting point. You need to give it an actual DOM element in order to mount to the page. So the way that we can do that is we'll say document.querySelector, and you pass it an ID of main. And you could also swap that out with document.getElementById. That would work as well. So now when I give it a save, we should be able to mount our React app to the page. You should see hey rendering out there. If you open up your React DevTools now, so I'm going to open up React DevTools, you will see the DevTools tab showing up, and you will see that this is how React sees your application, as just a paragraph tag. Now, we don't want to render out just a paragraph tag. We want to render out the entire store picker tag. So by creating a component called store picker, it allows us to use it by simply just using it as a regular tag. So we'll just say store picker, and I'm going to self-close it. We'll talk a little bit more about self-closing in just a second, but it's important that you either do something like this, store picker, where you have a corresponding closing tag, or you self-close it like that. So let me get rid of this extra here, give it a save. And now when React refreshes, you'll see that we now have a store picker component, and inside of that store picker component, we see just a regular paragraph tag. And React DevTools is always going to show you your custom components in purple and any other just regular DOM elements in a gray. Good. Now, it's a best practice to store your components not in one big file, but in order to aid in reusability of these store picker components, we are going to keep them in separate files so that we can import them and use them whenever we want. So let's open up our sidebar here, and you see in the source folder, there's a components folder. There's nothing in there except a git keep file. We're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it storepicker.js. I always like to name my components the same as the file name that we have there. And then what we want to do is take that class of store picker, cut it out, move it over to storepicker.js, and paste it in there. Now, let's give both of these a save, and we're going to run into some errors. Let's see how we can solve these. So what is it complaining about? First, store picker is not defined. And that's because in order to use a component in React, and actually in order to use anything in all of ES6 modules, you first need to import that thing into the file. Otherwise, it doesn't know where to get it. It has no idea that we've loaded this or we've created this component because it's not loaded into our main index.js file. So what we're going to do here is, first thing we're going to do is import React. So import React from React. And you may be saying like, hold on, Wes, didn't you already import React in index.js? And the answer to that is you will always need to import React into your components. And the fact that you import React more than once into your application doesn't matter. It's not going to put 3 or 40 copies of React. It's going to dedupe them and only give you one copy of React in the rendered. So you import it, you make what you want to make, and then at the end of the day, you export the thing that you want. I always like to think of this as making sausage. Here, before I give you a stupid example, let's export default store picker. So what we do here is you're making sausage. You import your ingredients. You make your sausage or whatever it is that you're trying to make. And then in order to make that, in order to surface it to other files in your application, you need to export it as a default from that file. Now, if we go back into index.js, we're still having this problem because we're essentially trying to use a variable called store picker here when it knows nothing about it. So we'll go ahead and import the store picker component from, and you might think like, okay, I'll just say store picker, right? Because that's what it was called. However, if there is no path on here, then it doesn't know whether to look into node modules because it's something we installed, or it doesn't know to look into your components folder because that's something that we've made. So what we want to do is give it a path, a relative path to where it is. So we're in the source folder. We need to go into the components folder, and then we want to go and grab the store picker.js file. Now you do not need the .js on the end, that's assumed, so you can leave that out. Now when I give it a refresh, it should render out the store picker back how we're used to. Let's just double check it one more time and say, I am the store picker. Beautiful. All right, so hopefully we have that up and running. We're going to be doing this whole thing, import, create a class, and export that. We're going to be doing that a whole lot throughout this class. See you in the next one.